So let's start off. So today we have Jordan Shapiro with us. How I know Jordan Shapiro is because there was a massive, big conference, and Jordan was the keynote speaker, and he gave the most eloquent, most interesting keynote about the concept of time. And he spoke about how time and physics and he had this whole clock there, and he kind of like brought in philosophy and history and education and time and technology all kind of tied into one conversation. I don't think by then you'd written these two books. I think you were in the process of the first one.
I think that's right. I think that because that keynote, which I remember writing on the plane to Hong Kong, I ended up rewritten into a chapter into the book, and I think that the main point was about how the way that we think about time impacts the way we think about education and students, and how we're preparing them to be adults and citizens and workers and all the things we're preparing them to be.
Amazing, yeah. So Jordan, I'm going to let you introduce yourself because I feel like you'll do a better job at telling us about who you are, who's Jordan Shapiro.
Oh, I don't know how to do that. I'm just Jordan. I have a lot of ideas. I like to share them. I write about them. I speak about them. I'm also a university professor, so I spend a lot of time in the classroom talking to students, teaching students, or actually probably more learning from students, honestly. But I try not to admit that because I'm the one who gets paid. So I don't know. Maybe they should get paid because I might be getting more than they are. Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of things. And I tend to write about whatever I'm interested in the moment, and I do a lot of research. I'm a PhD in psychology, philosophical psychology, sort of somewhere in between. And I live in Philadelphia in the United States with a lot of children, and my partner Amanda, and two cats. And I won't be surprised if we see the cats at some point.
Yeah. Always, my cat's right here listening in. So
mine's under the desk and sound asleep, so probably won't move.
Mine's a little bolder, a little more provocative than yours.
I see yours on Instagram all the time.
Oh yeah, he's always there because he's the equal part of my life. So let's kind of start off with where we left off 5 years ago, which is about your two books. I'd love to kind of hear about father figure in the new childhood and like what got you to write these books, what inspired them. Let's just start off with that.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, they're similar books. They're about very different things, of course. The New Childhood is about kids and thinking about how we raise kids and educate kids in a world of changing technologies and how technology impacts the way we think about child development. It's about because technology does impact the way we imagine child development in humongous ways. I mean, at any time when we're talking about what it takes to raise someone to be the best version of themselves, or the best citizen, or the best worker, or the best, most fulfilled adult, all of those things are always sort of connected to the way we think about the economy, the way we think about technology, the way we operate our lives, right? So if you think back to the ancient world, very different tools we had to prepare our children to be able to be good humans with, as opposed to today's tools, right? We don't teach many people anymore how to bang rocks against other rocks, but that was probably an important thing at some point in human history. And so the New Childhood is about how a changing world changes the way we need to think about ourselves, the way we need to think about people, and the way we need to think about caring for people. And in many ways, father figure, which is father figure, how to be a feminist dad, is about a very similar question, which is in a world where so many things about the way we think about gender are being renegotiated. So many things are changing. That we have a much more worldwide, a much more progressive lens on gender equality and gender parity, but what we haven't really done is prepared people to think about that. So you get a backlash from people who are just confused, who are just like, how do I think about myself if you're changing all the rules of what the world looks like for me? And so this is the father figure. It's a book to help all of us, although I wrote it as if it were written to fathers in particular, but I think it's applicable to everyone, about how do we have to change the way we think about who we are and how gender impacts our lives in order to succeed, thrive, feel fulfilled in a changing world, and to feel good about ourselves. And ultimately, both books are about how do we have people who are happier, more fulfilled, more of their best optimal selves.
I love that. I love that. So that's really interesting, I think, personally to a lot of us, but also professionally, which is, I think a lot of fathers are on this call and a lot of daughters on this call. And what I always think about is this world of competition amidst genders, but also competition amidst professions and professional roles, and how do you keep rising? How do you, as a when you were conceptualizing the book Father Figure, how would you think about how do women and men survive the world of competition and hustling and one-upping each other without oppressing, without being shunned out of society, without being disliked? Like, how do we make our way up without losing the ones below? I mean, not below, but like without losing our family and friends and our tribe?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that is the key point here. I mean, one is that we need to separate a lot of that out from the way we think about gender in particular, right? So we tend to have this idea that men are more competitive, which is not based on anything but cultural norms and cultural expectations, and so it becomes this idea that there's a competition. Of course, I'm just for equality. I'm not against competition. Competition's fine, as long as everybody gets to do it equally. The problem is if we start with the assumption that some people, because of how they look, or because of their genitals, or because of whatever reason, they don't get to participate in the same way as someone else, we have a problem. And to me, that's not a battle for who gets priority. That's not a battle for are women replacing men as no, I just want the best people to be all able to do what they need to do. And I think we all know that there's just as many I don't know if there's just as many brilliant men as there are stupid men. There might be more, and same for every gender. Right?
Yeah.
Right. There's no rule where an entire group of people are all one thing. There's always exceptions, and most people who thrive are just trying to be themselves, and what's sad is that we often put up obstacles to people trying to be their best selves, and we all lose when that happens. We all lose out on progress and innovation, and if we're in businesses, we lose out on potential employees and potential partners when we start to assume that because of what category we put someone in, that they're gonna not be the asset that we want in our lives. And I don't want that asset to sound like I'm somehow minimizing people into objects, because I think knowing you is an asset. We are friends, and we both gain from knowing each other. That's an asset. That's not necessary. That's not to make either one of us into something less than human.
Right. So I'm gonna kind of build on this. sometimes being yourself doesn't get you the gravitas or the popularity or the rise that you need. So you sometimes have to sway to the masses just for the, just for the numbers, for the likes, for the comments, for the eyeballs, or for whatever else. At the cost of sometimes losing yourself, because to get promoted, you have to say the right things, or to get 1,000 more followers on LinkedIn or on Twitter to get a blue tick. Like sometimes you just have to be very woke or politically correct, or post certain pictures, or post certain sob stories, or whatever else, or like post certain memes. How do we? And I think like history's always been like that, right? Like, I mean, the more provocative you become, the more edgier you get, or the more you rise out of the popular voices, the more you're going to be seen and known and bought into. How does one navigate professionally in this noise of likes and comments and popularity and gains and followers and all of that? Yeah, especially because we're all procurement folks, and that becomes very important to us. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think your example is true. There are plenty, there are times when we need to maybe perform in specific ways in order to achieve those likes and those followers. But and it does, and that works. I think we all, but I don't think it works in the long term. I think it may give you short term. I think the real goal, and at least when I'm teaching, I'm always trying to teach students this. The real goal is to figure out how to do those things in ways that are authentic are authentic to you. We don't want to be lying, we don't want to be faking, right? We need to figure out ways to participate in things that are that allow us to be ourselves, even though sometimes we may need to be ourselves in ways we might not have chosen. But that's not, we don't want to be someone else. So you use the example of being woke or politically correct. A lot of what father figure is about how you do that in a way that's not about policing the words you say or changing the words you say. Yes, there are times when we want to not say things that silence others, right? The point is not to be politically correct because we're afraid of getting in trouble, right? I don't even like the term politically correct that much, because while I am careful about the words that I use, it's not because I'm afraid of getting in trouble or offending someone. It's because I want to create as much possible space for other people to not feel held back as I can, right? So if we talk about using I don't know, let's say using pronouns. This is I don't know if it's everywhere, but in the US, this is a big question. Which pronouns does each person use based on the gender that they identify as? And to many people, they feel like they're being policed. I have to say certain things in order to make, but I think of it as the more comfortable that I make a student or a coworker or an employer or an employee feel, the more space I'm making for them to not feel policed. And in that, and to not feel like they're limited, and to not feel like they have to be something other. Yes, that's not natural. That's not, I wasn't born, but I wasn't born with any of the things I do. It's not like babies are born like, ready to get likes and followers, right? It's not like they're born ready to do 21st century jobs. It's always a matter of learning how to use your own self in a way that is, and this goes back to the new childhood question, in a way that is aligned with the economic, political, technological context in which you find yourself.
Yeah, right. So Jordan, I'll just pick up from here. You read a lot. I know you're an avid reader. You've read like all kinds of history and philosophy and all of that. How much do you think, historical ideas of natural selection, survival of the fittest, racism, all of that play out in today's world? And why I'm asking you this is because we're all digital nomads today. Earlier, we all had to really fight our way through to be seen or known or heard and all that. But today we've all got technology at our hands. how much of that has changed and how much still remains, and what do you predict is going to happen in the future of racism and all of these other concepts, science, natural selection, survival of the fittest, all of that?
Yeah. Oh, that's a huge question. Well, I think the first thing I'd say to that is that a lot of people like to use the idea of natural selection and survival of the fittest as sort of an excuse to be mean, right? An excuse to be competitive, an excuse to try to dominate, an excuse, and it makes no sense if you really think about it, because if you really understand what Darwin or any modern evolutionary scientist is saying, those who are the best at adapting are the fittest, right? It's not about doubling down and like dominating. It's about changing, adapting, being flexible, right? The entire theory is this idea that certain species, certain members of the species evolved certain traits that were better adapted to the context, and so therefore they thrived. And so in that sense, I think nothing has changed in that question, except for that many of us have started to use it as an argument to not change, right? to be bad at it, and that's problematic. I don't think I think technology in general has always come with all technologies throughout all of time always come with new challenges of trying to figure out how to get through the noise. I think they come with a bunch of promises and dreams and fantasies that don't really hold up, and everybody sort of jumps in, and then you have to figure out how to make it meaningful. If you look back at the beginning of the printing press, there were thousands of people doing little tiny pamphlets. People were worried about fake news with all these pamphlets, and in the long run, what do we have? Only a few of them are left, right? And in the long run, only a few lasted, but there were thousands. Everybody was trying to get in on this. I think the difference in our current moment is that our technology has an enormous amount of access. There's so much, so the entire world. The amount of people from so many different places that are just listening right now while you and I are speaking is crazy to just imagine the geographical diversity that's possible in any moment. And I think that makes it feel like it's a harder game. There's more people in it. Certainly, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot. I think we all know. If you just imagine Twitter, it's just a lot of noise, and then maybe you get a few good things here and there. And I think that has its unique challenges, but I don't think that it's so unique to the human experience.
Yeah. So I'll ask you a really personal, professional, procurement related question. But I see people who are in the space of procurement, or who are in the space of advertising, or in the space of, ed tech or something. And because they're the CEO of a company and they've got a big data and analytics team and all of that, they can post one sentence and they'll suddenly have 33,600 likes and 50 comments, and without ever questioning that artificial intelligence and intelligence are two different things. We just kind of put all eyeballs on that. They get covered and they get a lot of media coverage and all of that. Whereas like we could post something very valuable, but because we don't have all of the technology backing us up to gain us all of that shinning that somebody else has, how do you think we keep up in a place like this? Like, do we keep adding layers of infringement to kind of gain status, or do we just slowly, steadily keep doing our work and wait till people see our true intelligence rather than rely on artificial intelligence? So how would you think about that, considering you're a blue tick on Twitter and you understand the fame game?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think you're pointing to the fact that, again, in almost every technological era, and it's I think I'd argue probably that it's getting worse. No, maybe it's not getting worse, but it's certainly not getting better. That having power at the beginning gives you an a lopsided advantage on the ability to break through that noise. So, and if we take this historically, we might go back to the print again, the beginning of the printing press, and we might go, obviously, the kings and the churches and the religious leaders, they already had a distribution network to be able to put out a lot of material in a way that the average person who just managed to sell enough potatoes to be able to pay for printing just couldn't do ever. And that's still true, right? And one of the problems, I think, with media in general, not just modern media, but media in general, is that it comes with the promise that it's sort of equal, right? It's this idea that if you just put it out there, it will be discovered, when of course there's, it takes a lot of, it's not nearly as organic in its growth or in its being seen as it pretends to be. There's a lot you can do, and so what I would say to people is that there are tricks. If anything, the social media has created a space where it is a little bit more available, right? So there are ways to help to get your work out there. It might involve, and it does involve, some spending on advertising and marketing, of course, right? Anyone who thinks that we could just magically do it and everyone's gonna see it, it's just not how the world works, and it never was, right? And again, if you want to go back historically, if I come up with a great idea, I can't just like put it on paper and leave it outside my door. I guess I'm going back historically, so I should say leave it outside my hut and expect that someone is going to find it. I have to like go to the town square and start screaming and go, everyone look at this. Everyone, I have to do some marketing. I have to do some advertising. I have to do some pushing it out there. And so, I think that's good. I think it's fine. I think the problem is that we get the story that certain YouTube videos, for example, go viral magically. And while that may happen once out of every 1,000 ones that go viral, I don't even know what the statistics are. It's very rare. It's not, and if you really trace it, yeah, especially at the beginning of the internet, I felt like you could tell immediately that certain videos went viral because Disney wanted them to go viral, not because everybody discovered them in a magical way. So what I would say to people is understand that it takes work, and there's a lot of work, and there is no magic where you just sort of hold up your art or your product or your idea, and you just expect that everybody's going to magically be magnetically drawn towards it because it's so. I mean, maybe that's true for prophets, but I haven't seen it happen in real life in my lifetime. Maybe in the old days when there were spiritual gurus and prophets that had some magic. But I think even the gurus spend a lot of money on marketing and advertising, and I think we have to acknowledge that.
Yeah. So that brings me to a really interesting question, because the common thing between okay, let's take Rajiv's question before I get into this. Really wonderful insights. Rajiv, do you want to unmute and ask?
Absolutely. Hey, Jordan.
Hello.
So wonderful. This is this great conversation. I'm really enjoying listening into you, and I must admit that I am not picked up psychology or anything like that in my school, but I'm always fascinated by the ability of leaders and professors like to really step back and see this interconnectedness between technology, between science, between psychology, between human behavior, and really draw examples and put a story together. So I'm always fascinated by it. My question or kind of conversation something, to hear your perspective is, I often read that sometimes companies promote, you know, pardon me for this use of word, sometimes companies promote intelligent jerks. So, they say that, it's better to have somebody who may be a little abrasive, somebody who may be a little brash, but very smart, compared to a bunch of, mediocre people. Now, that's what I read sometimes. A lot of companies promote. My personal belief, is actually that culture always trumps intelligence. If people feel comfortable, and if it's a nice familial collegial culture, that would drive innovation. But that's my personal belief. But I want to hear your perspective. What do you think? What you have seen, heard, examples, why it may work, why it may not work, or where it may work, where it may not work. Anything, you have to share on that, because it applies to every function, irrespective of procurement, finance, marketing, whatever, in any organization.
Yeah, I'll start with my very simple, basic answer to that question, which is I don't see how you can be intelligent and be a jerk to begin with, right? That might mean you have certain kinds of intelligence, but you're certainly not well-rounded enough to understand the importance of human relatedness, which again is, as you say, brings this culture that allows for more people. And as we were talking about earlier in this conversation, for more people to allow more of themselves to blossom and thrive, and more of their potential to come through. I think we have this false notion of the crazy angry genius, right? Which is just not real. And it allows certain people to continue to act in inappropriate ways because they get to go, oh, but that's part of my gene. I mean, we have famous people, and we celebrate this on television all the time, the Elon Musks of the world and the Steve Jobs, and they're allowed to be so angry because they're so smart at other things. And I look at them and I go, yeah, you might be smart at other things, but you'd be better if you were also good at the other thing, right? If you're also good at the being kind and being compassionate. And so I think we have this strange, it's not strange. I mean, I can tell you philosophically, it comes from the same time as Descartes. It was happening all over the world, this idea that we could separate cognitive intellectual intelligence from social intelligence, or from emotion, or this idea that we were all isolated within our heads, and that our brains were the most important thing in the world. I'm not trying to say our brains aren't important. I'm just trying to say that there's interrelatedness in the way that our brains connect with each other. And the more you understand that, I think the more you're able to do more and more and more things. So I would say to leaders that if you have a brilliant jerk, just realize that all you're doing is basically saying, I prioritize this one person doing their best work over everyone else doing their best work, right? You're basically deciding only one asset is of value to you. All the other assets you would rather push down their potential. And I think that's just mathematically wrong, from a business standpoint wrong, and philosophically really problematic.
Okay. So Rajiv and Jordan, I think, like, just to kind of add to this question, I mean, we come from a world which is built out of wars. And today we live in a very transparent world, which means everyone's got a lot more sensitive. Microaggressions have raised a lot. Earlier, the world was, distributed in very small bubbles and farms and tribes and, little states. And now we've all become very globalized. The world's shrunk massively. How do you prevent, how do you even define? I mean, my brother is a big corporate guy, and nobody really would think that he's a kind guy, but he's very successful and he does really well at whatever he does. And I know many other such people who are just very cutting edge, to the point. They walk out of meetings, walk in. If somebody's speaking for longer than they need to, they'll be like, "All right, I'm done for the day." How do you like? How do we raise kids? But Jordan, we also kind of train people on procurement. We build procurement professionals. How do we justly raise intelligent, but also people who are agile enough to know when they're being taken for a ride, when their kindness is coming at a cost, when, like, how do we build culture, but also, a sense of, self-worth and pride? How do we balance the two? Especially because, Rajiv has been training procurement professionals for very long, and it's a very cutting edge, cutthroat space of procurement.
Yeah. I mean, you're getting to the main thesis of what I was writing about in the New Childhood, which is the point that as we get a more connected world, as we get a more globalized world, yes, there's a lot of things that become really hard about that, right? If we in a pre-digital technology world, I never had to interact with anyone outside of maybe an I don't know, 100-mile radius, right? And and most likely, and as we know, most people within 100-mile radius are actually very similar, right? They have similar cultural beliefs, similar religious beliefs, similar desires, similar ways of thinking about their lives, and so it's much easier to get along with them. Not that there aren't still arguments and fights and lots of conflict, but very different kinds of conflict than when I need to suddenly talk to people from all over the planet. And one of the problems is that we often, when we find ourselves in conflict, we get very defensive, and we start to and we start to sort of take things personally. We start to feel attacked, in those moments of conflict. And so, one of the things I've always been interested in when I think about raising kids in a time of global, when we're so globally connected, is how do you make sure that people have enough self-worth, to use the word you used, right, that they don't feel challenged when they're confronted with people different than them, right? Right now we get confronted with people different than us, many people, and we're so badly trained for this world, right, because it's so new, that as soon as we see people different than us, we feel that our worldview is threatened, we just immediately go into fight mode, right, because it's the easiest, and because we haven't been taught how do you both hold on to your sense of self? How do you stand your ground? And again, this starts to get to your procurement question and your brother and negotiations and meetings. How do you both stand your ground in ways that are not attacking, but are about just lifting yourself? And as you said earlier in the competition question, how do we lift ourselves without needing to step on other people in order to get higher? To me, that's the question that we really need in so many parts of life right now. And you can see it globally in just all the tribalism and the nationalism and the political infighting and the partisanship all over the world. It is very much a question of, hey, we've all been confronted with new things because we see people we never would have had to interact with 100 years ago. And rather than feel strong in ourselves and go, okay, two things can exist simultaneously, we attack the other.
Yeah, we struggle with holding hands. There's so much of polarity and everything. Yeah. So Jordan, you spoke about symbolism. Talk a little more about that, and where do you see the ancient art of symbolism play out today? That's one. But two, I mean, words are very clear, right? Like I write, so I enjoy clear writing. I enjoy clarity, but symbolism is really interesting because it's not here, it's not there, it's what you make of it. It's a little bit like art. How do you say that playing out, and how do you see that kind of like sometimes derailing us emotionally, intellectually? Talk a little more about symbolism.
Yeah. So if you think about we all know, obviously, that we all have very different perspectives. We see the world. In fact, I don't even know, we don't even know the degree to which we can see the same thing, right? For all I know, when you say green and I say green, we're talking about totally different colors, right? You could be talking about red. I'd have no way. In fact, and when you think about how different that we all are in that sense, it's almost it's a miracle that we can communicate, right? It's a miracle that words even work. But ultimately, what they're always doing is, and this gets back to what I was saying about in response to Rajiv's question, is that is that ultimately all of those words and all of the procurement and all of the and all of the symbolism exists in a space between two or more people, between people. In general, it's the way that we communicate something that is always vague, right? You say words are clear. Well, we've learned how to make words communicate clearly, but even they are just symbolism for concepts and that are much otherwise I could why can't I just write my whole book in a sentence, right? I know the idea in a sentence, but I had, in order to express it, in order to get it through many different people with different perspectives, we have to write it in very different ways, and we have to use words as symbolic representations of ideas. There's also, ancient symbolism, and those symbols that we still have, religious symbolism. These are often for the ideas that are the most uncertain, the most vague, the most ambiguous, the most confusing. That's when we need symbols the most. That's when we, in order to hold up a concept that just will not, or a feeling, or a sense of self that just will not tolerate borders and boundaries, right? Will not tolerate definition, does not like to be squeezed into a tiny little box, right? If you think about, for religious people watching this, whatever religion you are, if you think about all the mythology, all of the gods that your religion holds, those gods stand in for concepts that are so powerful that there's no way you could just put them in a word and just go, hey, this is love, for example. Instead, we have to go, love is way more complicated. It's so more complicated that we need images and temples and things that allow us to experience and understand this very real thing, right? This very real power in the world. I think, I'm not a deeply religious person, but I do understand that what religions are describing are very, 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 very real powers that we need to be at least reverent toward. Whether you believe they represent humanoids in the sky is a whole other question, but no matter what, they absolutely represent ideas that are and concepts and energy sources that are super powerful. I don't think that's changed. I think the only thing that's changed here is that we often that we've made the very, what's the right word? I don't know, anthropocentric. So human-centric belief that all these things are just in our heads and not in the space between our heads. And I think that's something that we have to reckon with, and we have to recognize that, especially in the internet, there's a lot of power between a lot of people that doesn't reside in individuals.
Yeah. So I mean, how would you academically, and this is my last question before I'll open it up to everyone, but how would you, from a very observer's academic lens, see procurement and symbolism? And if you had to, take a class on procurement, how would you explain procurement to them?
Well, I think on the most, I would go back to the most basic level of what's going on, which is exchange, right? And exchange is a sort of basic human need, right? We need to change, and it goes back to very early civilization, and the recognition that it's deeply inefficient to try to do everything yourself, right? We need to share resources, right? I don't want to chop the wood and catch the fish, so I chop the wood, you catch the fish, and we trade, right? And so I think on a very basic level, we need to recognize that procurement, like everything else, is actually about community, right? Is actually about the way that we connect with one another, and that doesn't, of course there's lots of things we have to do in along with that, and as we were saying earlier, right, it involves negotiation, and it can be cutthroat, and you're still going to try to get the best trade you can. I'm not trying to be all like touchy feely. Everybody should be, let's just love and share, like, the life works in a way where there is commerce, and there's nothing bad I mean, it can get bad, but that doesn't mean that it's inherently bad. And I think it's important in all things for us to constantly remember what they are on an inherent basis, right? That procurement on a very inherent basis is about trade, and is about exchange, and is about the way that people live together with one another to create so that we can all thrive. And in that sense, I think that's where I would start, at least to answer your question. If I were to start to look at it academically, and then I would go and say, where are we starting to see the threads of the really ancient symbolic kinds of exchange play themselves out in confusing ways, in problematic ways, in places, in my sense, many of the things in our lives that are most problematic, they're because we've forgotten the purpose. We've forgotten the meaning, and we've just doubled down on habit. We've just doubled down on doing it the same way over and over again, right? If the purpose is exchange, then the question is, how do we make an exchange that works for everybody, not how do I make an exchange that works for me?
Yeah, which is really hard, because how do you satisfy? No trade is, very few trades feel like this is totally satisfying for both parties. So.
Yeah, I once had a lawyer explain to me this way, that they like to look at it as the object is to make it equally bad for both people, and then it'll be fine.
Yeah, it's like a marriage, right? Like it's equally good, equally bad for two people, and that's what holds a marriage,
right?
for as long as it does, for sure.
Well,
Okay.
I think when you think about exchange or procurement in general, that kind of trade, both people are giving up something, so you want to make sure they're losing in equal amounts. Not instead of going in for winning, go in for how do I make sure we're both losing the same, and then we both win, ironically.
Yeah. That's how life works. Okay, so we've got 9 more minutes. I'm going to open it up for questions on anything and everything. So
okay, on anything, any question you can imagine about anything.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So Jordan, that's a follow-up question on the exchange part that you were mentioning, and also the little bit of a psychology connection or human behavior connection. I have seen, I've spent 25 plus years in procurement, and I've been doing all kinds of work in procurement, so I kind of feel very, very fortunate that I just did not keep doing the same thing for 25 years. So it has added a lot of diversity in the things that I do. But I have often seen or heard from my colleagues and friends in the industry that in procurement, everybody is trying to sell to the procurement person, right? So everybody, your suppliers, your vendors, and as a procurement person or head of procurement, you basically wield a lot of power, because you are the person that every vendor is trying to sell to, and then you are the one who is basically signing on their contracts. You are the one who is signing on the. So I think there is a lot of sense just by being in the position where you are responsible for the businesses of many suppliers, kind of sometimes can give you a feeling of false power, sense of false power. So how could one really avoid being in procurement? How could really one avoid getting into that sphere of I'm very, very powerful, just because I have this I wield this power that I can actually decide the fate of several businesses, because I can give them the contract, I can, pay them, that money and all that stuff, right?
Oh, that's like a question for a guru. How to? I guess I'll pretend that their answer would be, which would be.
Tell me more from a human behavior. So that's good. That's the reason I asked you, Jordan, is because look, I don't think a procurement person may have a different perspective, but I want to hear your perspective from more from a human behavior, human sciences perspective. That
Yeah.
how would you? Yeah, what's your perspective?
I mean, I think on the one hand, that's a very real power. I think that we have to first acknowledge that it's a real power. Like we sometimes like to pretend things aren't there. It's there, and it's very real, and it is, and it is powerful. The real question here is about how you make sure you wield it in thoughtful, meaningful ways. And of course, that's why the reason I joke that seems like a question for a guru is I think that's often a general human problem that we have, is that we all end up with, there are power dynamics in the world. There are power differentials. There's no way around this. This connects to the gender question. This connects to the parenting question. This connects to a teaching question. And of course, it connects to a procurement question, the way you said. These are very real power dynamics. How do you make sure you're not taking advantage of them? How do you make sure that you're being thoughtful about whether or not that power is wielded in ethical, moral ways? To me, that's the ultimate question there. If you want to be a good person, you have to figure out how to do that in ethical, moral ways, and that's something we should all aim to do, because we want a world that's more ethical and more moral, right? Like that's what civilization is on a very basic level, is we all agree to follow some basic rules in order to make it better for all of us. If we all went with, where do I have power? When I have power, I'm going to beat everyone around me and steal whatever I want, then it would be a pretty terrible world for everyone, because eventually I'm going to be old and weak and frail, and somebody's going to do it to me, right? So I even have a selfish reason to not get involved in taking advantage of those things. And so I think I think at the very basic point, it becomes this question of acknowledging the power differential in every moment and going, it's there, it's shaping things. Am I taking advantage of it, or is it just shaping the situation, right? And sometimes that means being forthright about it. Sometimes it means just being transparent about it, and sometimes I think you can't even be transparent about it because of the power differential. But I think at the end of the day, it is a again, I think it's an ethical, moral question, and we often make the mistake of thinking that the ethical, moral questions belong only to the spiritual, right? This is one of the great lies of the industrial age, is that we have, again, we've talked a lot about this already, right? That we separated the emotional, we separated the interpersonal, we separated and we separated the moral from the business and the intellectual, pretending that that's even possible, when really we didn't actually separate them. There's no such thing as just business. There's either ethical business or non-ethical business. We like to go, oh, it's just business, so therefore we can break the rules. Therefore, we're allowed to be mean to people. Therefore, we're allowed to dominate. No. We have to be able to do both simultaneously. And I think we all know that. And that's why I think, when you're a supplier or the procurer or a friend or a teacher or a parent or a lover or anything, you'd rather be with the people who do it with ethics and moral. And that's who we end up surrounding ourselves with. And we just end up getting angry and at the others. At first, we might get taken advantage of them, but they don't stick around in your lives. I mean, this is like a theme in this whole conversation about that. You're either authentic, present, and meaningful in yourself, or you're not, and you might get short-term gains without it, but you're not getting long-term gains. I can promise you that.
Absolutely wonderful. Thanks, Jordan. we love the perspective. Yeah.
Yes,
I,
sir.
I, yes. Well, I want to know if going to the question that was set on the title of this meeting, gaming, social media, and procurement, what's in common? I think that the response to that question would be, considering all that you have discussed so far, is power differential. Yeah. Is that what they have in common? Is that the answer to the question?
Yeah, I think that's a fine answer. I would also point out that we didn't even say anything about gaming. In the new childhood, one of the things, the way that I really define the idea of gaming, whether it's digital or non-digital, is this idea of operating within boundaries, operating within rules, right? And there's more to it, right? Like video games provide feedback. If you and I play chess, there's rules, but there's also and those rules limit and contain the kinds of behaviors we're allowed to participate in, right? Like I can't just, we both know, if we're playing chess and you make a good move, I can't just toss the board over. Some people do that, but they're just not playing anymore. They've quit the game at this point. And so I think that is the connection here to all of the questions, is that we need to recognize that boundaries, and I like boundaries because I like to think about games. If you think about football, there's white lines on the ground to say you're if we just were kicking the ball all over the entire city, it'd be a pretty terrible game, right? Right? We have to keep it within these white lines in order to make the game work. And those are not rules in the way that they. I don't like rules. I'm a rebel. I don't like them, but I also recognize that boundaries are what enable us to connect and what enable us to have interpersonal experience, and they allow us to see ourselves at the same time, right? So if you just go, if you think, I think about this sometimes, we're all covered in a million tiny microorganisms. We don't even know where we begin and where we end as actual individuals, right? We're all obviously connected to everything in a great oneness of the world. We also need to know where the boundary is so that I can say, hey, I'm Jordan, and this is what I'm talking about right now. The boundary enables me to exist. If I just go, oh, I'm one with everything, I don't even exist anymore. So that boundary is not actually taking away the connection, is not actually limiting the connection. It's actually allowing more possibility for experiencing the meaning and the connection. And I think that's true in social media, and I think that's true in gaming, and I think it's true in procurement. So there you go. I put it in an answer to your.
Would it be possible to apply these kind of boundaries or limits that contains the procurement process in a way that you take out that power that Dee was mentioning earlier?
Well, I think we do that all. We try to do those things all the time, right? These are what the legal rules try to do, and as they get better, we get better at recognizing how certain problematic power differentials need to have rules in place or legal codes in place to deal with them. And it's impossible to recognize every single one. As we see in so many things in the world, people, of course, there are people who take advantage of power and differentials, and then you go, wow, I never imagined anyone would try to do that. So I guess we need a new rule and a new law.
Yeah,
to say, hey, as a community, we don't agree with this way of doing business.
This remembers me the best place to work, like stamp that some companies have. Like we should have the best place to sell, the best company to sell, right? The best company who has the best standard procurement ethics.
And I think people do actually develop those ideas, even though it may not have the stamp of approval. I'm guessing for all of you who are procurement professionals, which companies you like to do business with and which ones you don't, for exactly the reason you're talking about.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So Jordan and Caesar and Rajiv, like this might also kind of like make you, if you want to jump in and answer this. I'm very curious. So I work with kids on the spectrum of autism who I know have historically proven to be geniuses, but they're many times oppressed So I work with them to push them into giftedness, but also sometimes I fail. Out of every 100 kids that I work with 95 of them, the growth that I'm able to make is minimal, not because of their brains, but also societally, historically, how they have been. It just makes it hard for them to rise. That's why we only see an Elon Musk or a Donald Trump or a Van Gogh or Einstein. But what I'm curious about is from a procurement lens or from like, an educator's lens, sometimes we feel like, people who've been, wronged in businesses, sunk businesses, minorities, when we challenge them, when we push them, they could erupt into something big. So, I mean, from a procurement lens, it kind of can get tempting to kind of take somebody who's sinking and then push them to see how much they would rise. Just from a very statistical lens, Jordan, what do you think is the chance of a sinking company got onto a big platform amplifier and that company rising as compared to an always floating, freely, smoothly working company, getting them on board and them rising? So statistically, where would you think we should be investing or procuring?
Oh, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, so many things about that question are interesting to me. One, your connection to people who are on the autism spectrum is very interesting to me, because if I think about what I was just saying, right, this question of how often in classrooms do we know that people make assumptions about people being problematic when really what's problematic is the rules, right? Not and by rules I just mean the structures in which we operate. And not the people, and that given the right opportunity. And again, if we go back to early in this conversation and the things I wrote in the book Father Figure, right? If you think about the so-called woke, politically correct language, right? That's an attempt to open up the rules in order to make more people have more freedom. That's not an attempt to close the rules. And so that it makes it really interesting to me. To your question about whether we think it's better to, I don't know if you said better, but is there more potential in a sort of company that's floating or a company that just needs the option? I don't know that it's a real. I think it might be a false categories. And so, I mean, they're not false categories. Of course, they're real categories. But I think on some level, it really depends on the company. I think in some cases it's always gonna be different. I don't know what statistically it would be, but I think you really have to ask these questions of what's the company. I wouldn't just assume because it's floating that it's better. If that's the point, it could be the struggling one might be the one that really, that opportunity can make it possible for it to thrive, as I think you're pointing out. Will it always? I think it really depends. Why is it struggling? Is it struggling just because it hasn't had opportunities? Just because or is it struggling because it's really terrible at what it does? I think as you need to ask those. You have to ask those questions and not make a sometimes attractive. I don't know if attractive is the right word. I don't know. We tend to like to imagine, we love underdog stories. Underdog stories are so fun. The idea that you take something struggling and
especially India, I mean, like that's what we look for, the underdog stories.
Yeah, it's a fantastic story. That's why we do it. But we have to be careful of being sort of seduced into believing that every underdog is only an underdog because they needed the opportunity. While also recognizing that many underdogs are only an underdog because they need the opportunity. And it's a hard place to sit in the middle. And it's, again, one of those things that requires asking a lot of hard questions and being really thoughtful about those relationships. And again, that's part of the benefit of recognizing the power differentials, right? The benefit of thinking about the power differentials is you go, what do I have the power to do here? What don't I have the power to do here? When am I seduced by the power? Whether that is seduced to abuse the power, or in the example of seduced by the idea that I might be able to create a great underdog story through my power, right? Both of you can be seduced on all sides of this.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a good question to explore more.